Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com. Tark, of course, will be joining us a little bit later here, but we are coming back at y'all today with kind of our preview, looking at reasons why Texas could dominate or could, reasons for concern this weekend as number 3 Texas hosts number 24 Kansas at DKR in Austin on Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central Time kickoff. Game broadcast live on ABC, so you got another national television audience for this one. You got a string of 3 straight ABC games, so I kind of like it better when the games are on ABC. It feels like the camera works a little bit better. It makes it easy to go back and watch film and stuff, just all that nerdy stuff after. But Kansas and Texas, this is a really interesting matchup in a multitude of ways. I've been pretty excited for this video this week, but I posted this on Twitter today. This is really a matchup of firsts and lasts between Texas and Kansas. Obviously it's the last meeting between Texas and Kansas's conference foes, but it's also the first ranked matchup in the Big 12 in conference play this season. That kind of went over my head. I'd never in my life, honestly, would I think that a Texas-Kansas game would be the first ranked matchup of any year of conference play in the Big 12. It's also the first ranked matchup in general in the Texas-Kansas series history. Last but not least, this is the first time that Kansas has ever played a top 3 opponent on the road. At least it's a conference foe when they're ranked. So this is a stage that they have not been on the road. And I'm going to highlight this a little bit later because I think that this game being at DKR, it really favors Texas in certain ways. I do wish it was a night game instead of maybe like the Wyoming game or the Baylor game. I think this is a bigger one, would be a cooler environment. But Texas coming into this game 4-0, 1-0 in Big 12 play, beat Baylor last weekend in convincing fashion, 38-6. Outside of some special teams miscues, looked much better than Baylor in every phase of the game. Kansas comes into this one also 4-0, 1-0 in Big 12 play. They beat BYU 38-27 last week. I do think Kansas has some impressive wins under their belt, double-digit wins over Illinois and BYU, 2 Power 5 teams that could be bowl teams this season. And, saying that Kansas has 2 wins over at least bowl quality Power 5 teams is still kind of a new thing for a lot of people. So, anyway, Shane, I'll pass it over to you. What are some of your thoughts coming into this game and coming off the Baylor win?
Yeah, looking towards the Kansas game, kind of what you just said at the end, I think is interesting because especially to fans that aren't as in tune to college football or the Big 12, Kansas still feels kind of like a laughingstock. And that's certainly not what they are with Lance Leipold. And that's what always gives me a little apprehension here is that they're going to play with a chip on their shoulder because they still don't feel like they have that national recognition, even though they are ranked number 24 in the country at this point. And it's one of those games if Texas does come out and they look flat and potentially even lose the game, it's not going to look pretty because then you have all the, you lost to Kansas. When in reality, Kansas could very well be the 3rd best team in the Big 12 this year from what we've seen thus far through 4 weeks. So I'm excited. It's going to be a high-flying matchup. Kansas has a lot of players that are fun to watch. They're one of those teams when they're not playing Texas, they always have a spot on one of my TVs because just the offense, we'll get into it, is really fun to watch. They get up and down the field, a lot of fast players. And, last year we saw Texas dominate this matchup running the football, I think over 400 yards on the ground and put up 55 points. But Leipold has started to shore up the defensive side of the ball. So I would not expect another outburst like that from Texas. And I think it's going to be a very intriguing game and kind of, a good mark for the Longhorns because what we saw against Baylor was definitely pure domination, but that was a Baylor team that, after 15 minutes of play didn't really seem like they wanted to be there. So this is going to be a very motivated Kansas squad. Like you mentioned at the top of the show, a lot of firsts for their program here. I'm sure Leipold will have passed that along to his team and they're going to know what's on the line. And, at this point, it's been 15 years, but Texas has to expect that they always get everyone's best shot, but now that they have number 3 next to their name, it's going to be even heightened. So every game's important, and this is one of the bigger games on the schedule, even though when you look at Kansas at face value, you might not think so.
Yeah, this Kansas team is, I think, going to be one of the best in the Big 12 this fall. If they can I think for Kansas, the question, if you play well against Texas or if they do manage to beat the Longhorns this weekend, I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll get into that more later. But I think the question for them is, can you really solidify yourself as one of the three best teams in the conference? Because then moving forward, if they're one of the top three, as they look to be right now with Texas and OU, granted it's still very early in the season, early in Big 12 play, that gives them the opportunity to really kind of rule over the new Big 12 moving forward. And I guess you have Utah coming into the mix, and that's always a tough out. But Kansas looks really, really strong right now. Some of the things that catch my eye for Kansas, you mentioned it. This is a game of firsts, kind of playing off what I said earlier. This Kansas team, though, they have a ton of experience. And so, you wouldn't think that some of these road atmospheres would phase them all that much. It's crazy. I think like all but one of their starters is an upperclassman on all sides of the ball. The only one I believe of which is a redshirt sophomore. Yeah, defensive tackle Tommy Dunn. And so they have a ton of experience. They were in the top 10 in the FBS coming into the season in returning production. It's hard to kind of see the value of that stat because it's so high level. But for Kansas, the fact that they do have so many upperclassmen, so many returning starters. I think they brought back like 10 starters on offense or something like that this year. And they've been good on both sides of the ball this year. Last year, like they were kind of carried by that offense. I think this year, the defense has massively improved. They're defending the run really well, holding teams to under 100 yards a game, which is a stat that's largely buoyed by the fact that they allowed I think under 10 rushing yards against BYU last week. BYU, I figured, was a solid rushing team coming into that game, and Kansas completely shut them down. But their pass defense has been good too. I think they're averaging over 203 yards allowed per game in the air and 1 touchdown compared to 1.5 interceptions. And so they've buttoned up a lot. I think there's ways you can beat this Kansas team, but on paper, this is a good looking squad. I guess I'll start here when I'm looking at kind of some of the reasons why I do think Texas could dominate Kansas on Saturday, or even just beat Kansas on Saturday. You really do have to kind of dig a little bit to find those reasons outside of one major factor. And I guess I'll start here. I always do my article on the site every week where I talk about the 4 reasons or 3 reasons why Texas will dominate or upset a certain team. I think most of the articles this year will be about domination because I don't know how much Texas is going to be an underdog. Now, one of the reasons it's so broad that I'm not going to mention it in the article is that, I think just Texas is the more talented team on paper by a really big margin on both sides of the ball. Talent depth and just overall athletic traits. Texas has the edge at almost every single position. Maybe not quarterbacks. Jalen Daniels is the better athlete than Quinn. Granted, Quinn's showed off the wheels at some points this year. And so, can Texas really beat Kansas in space? And can they, win a lot of those battles in the trenches? And just really show that they are the better team at home. That sounds so incredibly simple, but I think a lot of this game will come down to that. I don't know what your thoughts on that are. It's a pretty simple thing to say.
Yeah, I think, kind of one of my reasons to look for potential domination is the lines of scrimmage, because I think that's where it really shows up with the big bodies and just getting pressure and on the offensive side, pushing Kansas back. And, we saw it last week against Baylor. Byron Murphy, Barron Sorrell set the tone on the first drive of the series. And granted, Sawyer Robertson was a little banged up and couldn't move that well. And we're going to see Jalen Daniels. He's going to break off some runs. But I think for the most part, Texas should be able to dominate the line of scrimmage, even with, just 3 or 4 man fronts. And we've seen the emergence of Anthony Hill. PK's using him in incredible ways, coming off different sides of the ball and disguising his look. So I think that's kind of where I look for Texas to take a stranglehold of this game, is to really move that Kansas offensive line back and not, allow Jalen Daniels a ton of time to throw the football, because we've seen this year he's completing nearly 75% of his passes, which is top 10 in the nation. So when he has time, he finds his receivers. He's also very adept at throwing on the move as well. So it's going to be one of those things where you're going to have to try to keep him in the pocket. But I think we should expect a big game from the guys on the interior defensive line, Byron Murphy, Devondre Sweat. Seen a lot of good snaps from Trill Carter over the past couple of weeks as well. So I think that's an area where Texas can really, start the game and kind of show the Jayhawks we're different. Like that we this is an SEC defensive line, quote unquote, and we're going to push you around.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stats kind of playing off what you mentioned with Daniels and, him getting so much time in the pocket this year. Kansas's offensive line has been really, really solid. I think Kansas ranks like 4th in the Big 12 this year in pressure rate allowed. Yeah, about 22%. Texas actually leads in that stat. So, both offensive lines have been really solid this year. But Kansas, there's not really many weak points along the offensive line. Every single one of their starters grades out among the top half of starting offensive linemen in pass blocking in the Big 12 this year. And they've also been very, very good for most of the season in run blocking. I'd say they're better in pass pro than they are in run blocking. So maybe you have some opportunities there to get some stuffs and limit Kansas on the ground. But, point here is for Jalen Daniels. He leads the Big 12 this year in time to throw. So he's had a lot of clean pockets this year. He hasn't been pressured a ton. And I think he's been pressured on like 9 dropbacks or something like that this year where he's actually thrown a pass. And so he's been okay doing that too. So it's like kind of hard to find where you pick apart the flaws there. But like the fact of the matter is you do have to get pressure on the quarterback. And if you can get Daniels to get the ball out faster and make that happen off schedule, that I think is where the key is, because Jalen Daniels has been good this season. They throw a lot of like different screens. They run a lot of option plays, have a ton of motion. Texas and Kansas are the 2 teams that have run the most plays with any motion in the passing game so far this season in the Big 12. And I think for Texas, if you can get Daniels, with a little bit of happy feet in the pocket back there on just design dropbacks, that's really going to limit what Kansas can do offensively. I think they're a very scripted offense in certain ways, where again they run a ton of motion, a lot of option plays. They really like to get their 2 running backs involved, very drawn up in the short, intermediate, and screen game for the passing game. And so put them behind the sticks, send them up in 3rd and long. I mean, the Texas defensive front just has to do what they've been doing for most of the season, and that's getting pressure on the quarterback. He had 5 sacks against Baylor, 5 sacks against Alabama. And so, that's going to be a major key here.
Just to jump in, I think you hit the nail on the head there with talking about getting them off schedule. Kansas right now, 60% of their plays through 4 games have been on the ground, which is 12th most in the country. And they've been able to just, stay ahead of the sticks, which gives Jalen Daniels the time to operate and, take those deep shots that we've seen, because they are a very explosive offense, but a lot of that starts with the running game and being able to, pick up chunk yards. And if they stay ahead of the sticks, like you said, stay on script, they're tough to defend against. But if you can pick up those early quarterback pressures and, potentially sacks as well, get them behind the sticks, I think that's where you see them start to press a little bit. Even if they fall down by a touchdown or 2 early, I think that massively favors the Longhorns, because, when this offense is allowed to do what they want to do, they become very effective.
Yeah. I mean, all props to the Kansas staff. They've had some bang up game plans this season. You've seen them jump all over teams. I feel like most games this season, like they jumped all over Illinois, multi-score lead at halftime. BYU, they controlled that game most of the way. The Nevada game was really the only one where it was like kind of close. But this is a clean transition into my first more focused point of why I do think Texas could dominate when you're looking at some of the finer details in this game. And I do think that Texas matches up well on paper when you're talking about the Texas defense versus the Kansas offense, really within, that constraints of 0 to 15 or 0 to 19 yards from the line of scrimmage. I think Texas has a lot of players that can neutralize Kansas's biggest weapons. Jalen Daniels, obviously a good quarterback. he is a dual threat. He can run the ball, but most of his runs are on design plays. They've only had, I think it's like 6 scramble attempts this season, going for like 40, 42 yards. He can pick up those key downs when needed, but I think we all know that he can make plays with his legs. He kind of made that happen a lot last year before injuries started to pile up. And so, I think for Texas, you mentioned Anthony Hill. I think he can be a big kind of chess piece that you can use in run defense, and then to have some different pressure looks on Daniels. I think for Devin Neal, being able to stop him, you really have to contain him on the edges. They like to run a lot of like stretch stuff outside zone. I think something like 85% of his rushing production has come off or has come like running outside of the tackles this year. So kind of in that D gap area. And he's averaging like 9 yards a carry running there. So, Ethan Burke, Justice Finkley, I think is going to play a role in this game. Shout out to him, first solo sack of his career last week against Baylor. And then, Anthony Hill, then you can get him involved, and then obviously Barron Sorrell. Those guys are going to have to be really solid. But, I think for Kansas in the passing game, they do have a lot of quality weapons, but they don't really stretch the field that much. I'll talk about that part a little bit later. But, I think with Texas, you got so many defensive backs that are so good in defending the short and intermediate passing game. Ryan Watts, people have been getting over the top on him a little bit this season, mainly last week against Baylor. But, he's been solid in the short and intermediate passing game. Terrence Brooks is really solid there. Malik Muhammad has been really good there. Obviously, Jahdae Barron is awesome there. And so I'm not too worried about that. They attack between the numbers a lot. And, that's kind of where Jalen Ford lives. He had that big interception last year against Kansas. I think he could be a candidate to get an interception this week. So they just like to throw over the middle so much. And so, I like how Texas's defense matches up for the most part. But like you mentioned, the key point here is going to be what happens on the interior. Do they find ways to neutralize T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy? If they do, that would really be the first time this season that's happened. But their interior offensive line is really good. It might be the best, or at least the most consistent interior offensive line Texas has faced this year. So there's that. But I do like the way that Texas matches up with Kansas's offense for the most part.
Yeah, and we saw the one Russian quarterback Texas has faced this year thus far really was Jalen Milroe. And sack yards accounted for. He only finished with 44 yards on the ground, which is really impressive. And we've seen the Texas defense team speed show up. So you mentioned how, Devin Neal lives on those outside zone plays, and, Jalen Daniels, when he does get on the edge, he's one of the quicker quarterbacks in the country. But I like the team speed of Texas to be able to track those guys down. I think that really favors the Longhorns. And it's going to be about gap integrity, but I'd be surprised if we do see Neal have anywhere near the amount of success he's been having this season on the outside zone type plays, because we saw it against Baylor when those running backs get to the edge, there's 4 or 5 Longhorn defenders right there. So I do feel confident when it comes to that part of the game.
Yeah. And, this, like you said, this is not the first time Texas is going to face this sort of rushing attack in certain respects. Like you said, Baylor, Richard Reese, that faster style running back that Texas was able to neutralize. And then for Kansas too, Devin Neal is not the only weapon they have, far from it. Daniel Hinshaw has been very solid for them, actually a little bit more efficient in terms of yards per carry. I think he's north of that 7-yard mark. He's a little bit bigger, though. He's the guy that they like to use to rush inside a little bit more often. He's got 235 yards, 3 touchdowns on the season. And, for Texas, you shut down Pendergrass for the most part last week, the true freshman at Baylor. And in a way, there's similarities here. And Dominic Richardson, granted, he had the high ankle sprain, so he was not able to run at his most physical that he can. But I do think that Texas has the advantage there on defense. The next thing I wanted to point out here is more specifically, and I've mentioned it already, I don't think that Kansas really has much of an ability to stretch the field this season. It's kind of weird. Jalen Daniels was one of the higher graded deep ball throwers in the Big 12 last year, but it just kind of hasn't been there this year. He's 3rd from the bottom, I believe, in the Big 12 in deep ball throwing grade. They don't have any touchdowns there, and I believe that's his only interception this season has come on the deep ball. So, they got some good receivers, but they don't, like I said, they really target that short and intermediate passing game. It kind of takes them off schedule to have to throw the deep ball. And I think for Texas, getting over the top on us has been one of our weaknesses. Alabama got over the top on Jaron Thompson for a key play, and then Ryan Watts 2 times last week. So that kind of alleviates a concern for me. It's still something you have to watch out for a little bit. I mean, it's not like Kansas is completely unable to throw the deep ball, but I do think that's one thing that will be another advantage for the Texas defense. The next thing I had up, and that I wanted to mention, this is more like a high level thing for Kansas. One of the things that caught my eye looking through kind of their game splits and their schedule the last few years, when I was doing my research for the video, Kansas is not very good on the road. They have one of the most stark contrasts in margin of victory, FEI efficiency, things like that, when between playing at home and playing on the road. That is by far their closest game this season was on the road against Nevada. They won that game 34 or 31-24. I think that was a late. No, I mean, actually, I think didn't it take a late touchdown from Kansas to beat Nevada? I think it did. And so they've lost, I think, 5 straight conference games on the road. It's 4 or 5 dating back to last season. I know Texas really beat up on Kansas last year in Lawrence, but that was with Bijan Robinson in a ground game that wasn't able to be stopped by Kansas. And then also, again, you had an injured Jalen Daniels. And so I think, if Texas plays even to a B level this week, I know they've had their own struggles at home this season. This is a Kansas team that usually plays at a C level, it feels like, on the road. So I think that could be a difference maker here. They haven't been tested like this on the road yet.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because when you look at it on a surface level, you think, oh, they play worse on the road. Everyone plays worse on the road. It seems like it's much more stark for these programs that, were in the basement and are slowly climbing up. That first transition from, moving from a 3-win team to a 6-win team is, you get your ducks in a row at home. And we've seen Kansas, they're actually bringing people out to the games now. And Lawrence seems a little more lively at home. And Leipold has seemed to kind of rally the troops there. But the next step you have to take as a program is being great on the road. And like you said, that just hasn't happened yet. And I know Nevada can be a frisky team in the Mountain West. Not this year. They're towards the bottom of the conference. They're going to finish, in the bottom half, maybe even the bottom quarter of the conference. So only beating them on a late touchdown is definitely a cause for concern. And I think that's a great point that you bring up. I do think it'll be rocking in DKR, despite it not being a night game. I think that could definitely pose some problems for the Jayhawks.
I mean, it's going to be an awesome atmosphere. That is for sure. But yeah, like you said, I do think that's going to get them issues. So the last thing we can focus on here, just matchup wise, the Texas offense versus the Kansas defense. I mean, this one's pretty straightforward. Quinn Ewers is going to have to be on point. Texas is going to have to find a way to run the ball well. Kansas's defense, again, has been solid against the run this year. It's hard to find where exactly you can run the ball against them. They're solid up the middle. They got some size up front between, I believe, their 6'3", 310-pound defensive tackle, Tommy Dunn, and then Devin Phillips, senior transfer nose guard, is 6'2", 310, 315. So they got some size up front. Their edge rushers are pretty solid. Their defensive ends, I believe they play 4 down front, 4-3 defense. Hayden Hatcher, Jeremy Robinson. They can rotate a lot too. They got I think 8 or 10 guys they like to rotate up front. So, kind of similar to Texas in that way, even though I do think Texas's line is better than Kansas. But, the one way I do think Texas can beat Kansas is 2 ways, actually. First one being just the deep ball. Kansas hasn't really faced a team that can hit the deep ball consistently this season. Illinois, not a team that stretches the field. Nevada, like I said, just not very good. And BYU, Keaton Slovis is not a guy that's known for just sitting back there, tossing it over the top. Yours is going to have to find a way to get that done. I'd like to see Adonai Mitchell get a couple of targets over the top. Same thing with Worthy. Isaiah Nayor seems to be in a little bit of a doghouse right now, still working his way back from injury, so don't quite know there. But Also, Jatavion Sanders, I think, is going to be a massive weapon here. Getting him down the seam, maybe getting him some targets. He had that awesome one-handed catch last week, had his second 100 receiving yard game of the season. Kansas had some issues defending BYU's tight ends. I believe they allowed over 50 receiving yards against BYU's tight ends last week. BYU was really the first team to use tight ends a lot against them as well. And so the one stat I wanted to mention, Kansas is allowing 21.3 yards per passing attempt on the deep ball this season. That is most of any defense in the Big 12 by about a 3-yard margin. They've only had 10 attempts, though, and none of the teams that tried it are really that good at throwing it. So Ewers going to have to connect on the deep ball, which for some reason he has not shown the ability to do at home since that Alabama first quarter last year. So that's going to be a major thing, I think, for him. The other thing is, I kind of hinted at it with the whole Sanders thing. I don't think Kansas can test space very well. They're bottom of the Big 12 in open field yards for their defense, which is kind of a metric that evaluates after someone has reached the second level and has space, whether it be, usually it's passing plays, how well they're actually able to tackle. They're also 4th or 5th from the bottom in tackle rate or missed tackle rate this season. So they've kind of had some issues contesting space this season.
Yeah, and just to kind of play off that, I think there are a number of different factors why the deep ball hasn't been effective, and one of them certainly is the opponents they're playing. Not effective, but just the volume hasn't been there, like you said, only 10 attempts. But the Kansas defensive line, specifically, you mentioned the pass rush, has actually been very solid this year. Nearly a 10% team sack percentage, which is top 20 in the country, and they have Jareem Robinson and Austin Booker, both with 3.5 sacks each. And you mentioned the rotation that they have up front. And they're going to be throwing in fresh bodies, but they certainly haven't played an offensive line like Texas. So I think if Texas is able to hold up and give Ewers time, that the Longhorns are going to win the matchup on the outside. Kobe Bryant for the Jayhawks is one of the best corners in the conference, but that's just one guy. And I don't think the depth of runs, as they don't have as much depth in the back end as they do up front. So if they can give Quinn time, I think he's going to have his opportunities to beat them deep. And, that's where you can break open a game. And that just completely transitions the whole game, because then on the offensive side of the ball, Kansas is going to be pressing as well. So we're going to see the shots. Hopefully they connect now. It seems like every other game Ewers has, he throws the deep ball well, like against Alabama, was very solid. Against Wyoming, we really didn't see many attempts. And against Baylor, he was really solid. So hopefully it's not a one-on-one off thing, and hopefully we can see those connections on Saturday.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be interesting to me to see what the average time of possession per scoring drive is for Texas this season, because I do wonder if I probably should have came with that stat already. It seems like one I would have ready. But anyway, Texas has had so many quick scoring drives this year where it's just bang, bang, touchdown. I don't think Kansas can keep up with that. You mentioned it earlier. They run the ball so much that Jalen Daniels hasn't had to just sit back there and play catch up. So Texas is another game where you got to set the tone. I think a lot of that will rest on Ewers, because I don't know if I feel great about just trying to run the ball down Kansas's throat out of the gates. I think that's going to be, in a way, what they're expecting. So we'll see with that. But really quickly, I know you got to get going here in a moment, and Park's running a little bit late too. But give score here, predictions, anything like that.
Yeah, I'm going to make one more point.
First.
Yeah,
Okay.
just to kind of bring it full circle. I was looking into this. Jalen Daniels in games where he's attempted at least 30 passes, 8 games, the Jayhawks are 1-7. So that kind of just ties together all the points we've been talking about this video.
Yeah,
not only keep them behind the sticks, because I mean, you think about it, Jalen Daniels, he was picked as, the first team quarterback in the Big 12. So you think the more times he throws, the better for the Jayhawks. Certainly not the case. We talked about keeping them behind the sticks, and if those pass attempt numbers are high, it typically is not boded well for Kansas. So that's another reason, if Texas can get out to a fast start and really make that offense one-dimensional, the game completely flips on its head.
Yeah, and Jalen Daniels has turned into more of a pocket passer this year, I think, just so they can keep him a little bit healthier. And he's a guy that had I think he was like 400 or 500 rushing yards last season. a lot of touchdowns too. And so you kind of taken that dual threat element away from him in a lot of respects in the game. And that was a good stat you brought up too. I think that definitely hits home the point of Kansas is not used to having to rest the game on Jalen Daniels' arms in a shootout. Um, I score prediction for me, I thought of this earlier today. I have 37-20. I think that this game's going to be close. I think it can be pretty tight early. But again, Kansas, I don't think is a team used to getting in a shootout. You just can't let them get very far ahead early because then that puts you in a tough situation where Ewers has to go against a experienced defense. Again, Texas has not played super well at home this season. And so you give Kansas confidence on the road. It's all the things you don't want. So, but I think Texas comes up with 17-point win is almost, I think, this what the opening spread was. I don't know what it is now, but yeah.
I'm kind of on the same page as you. The number that's been sticking in my head is 38-23. Like you said, I think Kansas is going to keep it close early, but I do see Texas being able to wear them down. I think we'd be remiss to not mention that Kansas right now, their offense is first in the country in third down conversion percentage. I think that's somewhere where Texas could get in trouble. That they're hitting nearly 63% of their third downs, and that's a product of them staying in front of the chains. We keep coming back to it, but I think it's super important where those 3rd and 7s and longer, they're not going to be advantageous for the Jayhawks. So I think that is potentially a path to victory for Kansas if they just continue that at that really high rate. But no, I do think the overall team talent for Texas is going to be too tough. And there's so many factors here, and you did a good job mentioning the home and road splits for the Jayhawks. Those will factor in the second half as well.
All right, so Shane had to get going there, but I did want to talk about recruiting a little bit before we get going and mention a few more potential problematic areas or just concerns for Texas in this game. We kind of hit on most of them during the video, but just to wrap that part up forward really quick. A few areas that I pinpointed. I got an article coming at the site as always later this week. I do think that Kansas's motion offense and all the option plays they run, out of the gates, that can be tough to defend. Kansas runs literally the most option plays and is second in plays with any motion in the passing game of any team in the Big 12. Texas being first in terms of plays with motion in the passing game, but that's something that can definitely keep you off balance. Again, Texas has a lot of players that haven't kind of faced this sort of offense that Kansas is going to run, at least at full strength, because Kansas is a pretty healthy team. Last season, Jalen Daniels comes in injured. They're pretty banged up. Texas ends up setting the tone right away with the ground game, kind of puts Kansas off schedule. But Kansas is going to come in, I think, with a very buttoned-up game plan. So something to watch here for sure. A couple other things I pinpointed. We mentioned Kansas' offensive line. Might be the best offensive line Texas has faced so far this season. I mentioned Kansas, one of the best in terms of pass pro in the Big 12, and kind of still in that upper echelon in terms of run blocking grade. So they are averaging over 5 yards per carry. They got 3 guys that all rank in the top half of the Big 12 among starting offensive linemen in run blocking grade. So they're doing a lot of good things there. Jalen Daniels mentioned it. They're not running him as much this year, but he's still got the dual threat element. I think if Kansas is going to come out and run him in any game, it's probably this one. One they've been preparing for a long time, I would assume, one of their biggest games of the season. So that's something to watch. I think for Kansas's defense, I didn't mention some of these, areas of concern for me, but Kansas does wreak a lot of havoc. They lead in total havoc plays of any Big 12 defense this season, and it's really not even close. In terms of havoc rates, they're second in the Big 12 because West Virginia hasn't faced as many plays on defense, but has a higher rate of havoc plays. Kansas gets after the passer pretty well. They are top 5 in the Big 12 in pressure and top 6 in sack rate. So, they're good in those regards. They are pretty good defending the run too, as we mentioned earlier. So, definitely some stuff to watch out for there. Texas obviously can't come out with a vanilla game plan. So, I just wanted to mention those, some of those potential concerns for me that we didn't fully elaborate on in the video between Shane and I. And then last but not least, I wanted to talk about recruiting before we get up and going here. Texas had a big recruiting weekend for the Week 3 game against Wyoming, that 31-10 win on September 16th. Texas had a few dozen visitors on campus for that game, including a bevy of elite wide receivers. 5-star wide receiver Andrew Marsh, 2025 guy into the 2025 high 4-star Marcus Harris out of Santa Ana Mater Dei. Also had DeCorian Moore and Ryan Wingo, I think the two top wide receiver targets for the next 2 cycles. And so, this weekend, I think the biggest news so far in terms of visitors for the Kansas game, DeCorian Moore is making a return visit. This will now make it 2 of 3 home games that he has visited Texas for this year. There's a chance that Colin Simmons, the 5-star Duncanville edge rusher commit, makes it in with him. Simmons and Moore visited together for the Wyoming game. But, Texas's wide receivers have looked really good here. I think especially in 2 of the last 3 games. But, Worthy had a big play against Wyoming, and Texas was able to get some guys involved late there, and was still able to come up with a convincing win. I think guys like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Jonte Cook, even potentially JT Sanders. These are some of the guys that are going to play big roles on Saturday to if Texas can come up big with a big win against Kansas. And so showing off in front of DK Moore. You got, I believe, a 2026 visitor among the top in-state guys in the 2026 class at the position, Braden Robinson, that will be on campus as well. For other position groups, there's still I think some really intriguing visitors that could be on campus this weekend. You could have the 2 IMG Academy guys, Jordan Johnson-Rebel, 4-star defensive back commit, and then 4-star running back Jared Gibson. I think if you get Gibson on campus this weekend, the running game looks good. You kind of quiet some of the potential chatter between Gibson and Florida, but I don't think there's much to do about that anyway. I'd be potentially more worried about DeAndre Robinson as a flip candidate from Texas among the guys that are currently committed to the 24 class. He took that visit to Florida last weekend. Did not give any heads up to the coaching staff in the week prior. Granted, he did say that he was planning on visiting Florida during some interviews he conducted later in the summer. So it's not like it was completely surprising, but still something that you don't fully like to see. It's always concerning when you see someone taking a visit without notifying the staff prior. And he did say that he straight up said in interviews last week, one of them with Gators Online, that Florida has a chance, that he's not completely shut down to that. So still something to watch. But anyway, some of the other visitors, I mentioned Colin Simmons potentially making it in this weekend. Duncanville is on a bye week, so he's got time to make it. And then 4-star Auburn commit, Santa Ana Mater Dei interior offensive lineman, DeAndre Carter. He's, I believe, still scheduled to make it in for an official visit. He committed to Auburn. I believe that was last month, but Texas has stayed kind of putting the full court press on him. And, Texas landed a commitment on Sunday from 5-star Mater Dei offensive tackle, number 1 offensive tackle recruit in the nation in the 2024 class, Brandon Baker. And so, you got momentum right now recruiting along the offensive line. Carter's still receptive to Texas if he's willing to take his official visit. So that's a big one to watch. Texas potentially could have 4-star Carrollwood Day out of Tampa, Florida, edge rusher Solomon Williams in this weekend. At this point, I think he's the top edge rusher priority among uncommitted guys because Danny Okoye, the 4-star edge rusher out of Tulsa, homeschool guy, committed to OU last week. So Williams, it really comes down to, I think he's dealing with a family thing right now, more important priority, but still is, again, one of the top targets left on the board. I think Texas is sitting in a good spot for him. It would obviously be great if he could make the official visit this weekend, but we'll monitor that. Kobe Black potentially making it in. Inside Texas reported that he is considering visiting Texas this weekend, but not confirmed. Multiple other 2025 guys, 4-star defensive tackle out of Lufkin, Zion Williams is one of the big additions, I think. You also got Jackson Christian, offensive tackle, big, 6'5", 290-pound out of Port Neches Groves in Texas. He actually had an on 3 RPM put in, projecting his commitment to Texas from Jerry Hamilton. That was yesterday. And then you also got a few guys that I do like. You got 3-star cornerback, I believe he's out of Allen. Malik Hawkins, he's visited Texas a couple of times already. He has a Texas offer. And then another one, a guy that I've kind of had my eye on for a little bit, 4-star Captain Shreve out of Shreveport, Louisiana, interior offensive lineman, Devin Harper, big, about 6'5", 295-pound offensive guard, more than likely, and guy that's got a lot of room left to grow, big, strong offensive lineman. Harper, a guy that has not made it to Texas for a game day visit yet, so he holds Texas offer. This could be a big one to watch. But yeah, and we'll continue to watch. There's a lot of guys that have been announcing that they'll be visiting this weekend. I'm sure that we'll get some bigger visit news in the coming days here. So anyway, just stay tuned with the site. I'll have my piece coming later this week, breaking down the biggest visitors for the weekend, which I'm sure will be a moving target to cover this week. But anyway, exciting nonetheless. But anyway, for Andrew Miller at Hook'emHeadlines.com, that's pretty much it. Hook 'em.